Margaret Aoife Katerina Del Cassian was born an orphan on the planet Solasta in the Gothic sector. That sentence may sound strange to you if you yourself aren't from Solasta. A convoluted birthing program on the planet has led to the systemic production of noble-class orphans conceived in vitro and gestated in artificial wombs upon the death of their parents, who likely have never even met. This program serves to supply the planet with a steady supply of Scala Progenium acolytes who go on to serve the greater imperium of mankind. Indeed, Scala graduates serve as the primary export of the planet, and Aoife was one among them. Aoife was a talented student during her curriculum, but her petite stature left her lacking in physical prowess compared to many of her fellow students. Knowing that she would not be able to qualify for the arduous physical feats required to join one of the orders militant of the Adeptus Sororitas, she instead leaned into her studies and became a standout pick for the Order's Hospitaller. Upon graduation from the Scala, she was whisked away to the Convent Sanctorum on Ophelia 7 to learn the ways of the Chirurgeon as a new acolyte of the Order of the Eternal Candle. She spent several years in the convent, learning all she could about battlefield medicine, logistics, and all the common and exotic ailments that plague Imperial citizens in and out of war zones. As she reached the age of 18, she was sent out on her first official deployment to support the Sisters of the Bloody Rose in their commandery on Gallowglass, a moon of the planet Malfi located in the Calixus sector. She spent a year there assimilating to the robust and fiery culture of the Bloody Rose, who came to appreciate Aoife after she had an unexpected upset victory in the fighting pits due to some quick thinking. They considered her one of their own after that, and found that her natural penchant for irreverent, but never impious humor and her blazing spirit complemented the Bloody Rose well. Her sister superior, Caria Vortel, took an immediate liking to the young Hospitaller and made sure she felt as welcome as she could. After a year on Gallowglass, assisting in small skirmishes and defense operations throughout the Calixus sector, Aoife was conscripted in a new joint operation between the Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos and the Ordo Hereticus. The Sisters were to aid several regiments of the Astra Militarum and the Inquisition in venturing out into the Coronis Expanse, the borderland of Imperial control. There were disturbing reports of some sort of heretical uprising brewing out there, but no one was certain if it was alien in nature or influenced by the archenemy of chaos. It was on the planet Inequity that Aoife met her first great trial, and her greatest of failures. The Inquisitional forces were nearly wiped out by a gene-stealer cult uprising, and Aoife could only watch helplessly from the backlines as squad upon squad of her sisters were sent out only to return in stretchers, or not return at all. Routes and retreats were forced upon the ill-omened expeditions, and Aoife truly lost hope when she learned that Sister Caria's squad, her squad, was entirely wiped out. Aoife made it out along with the Inquisitors present and the few remaining forces they had left, but it was a massive loss for the Imperium as an entire Promethean mining planet was turned over to Xenos control. They had a new mission: return to the Calixus sector and warn the powers that be of the now lit beacon attracting the Great Devourer, the Tyrannid swarms. Aoife, broken and terrified, couldn't bear continuing down this path. She requested and was accepted for a small position running a no-name underhive clinic on Barraspine, a position usually held for Hospitallers still in training. Everything on paper was legitimate, but she and her fellow surviving sisters both knew what it really was: a profound act of cowardice. It was there, in the underhives of Revocale, that she opened the first Spark, a clinic that more often than not served gangers and mutants than anyone else. She hid her identity as a member of the Sororitas and operated relatively undisturbed for 3 years, until one interrogator, Udar, stopped by and asked for a Sister Aoife Del Cassian. Knowing the jig was up, Aoife polished her power armor and joined a motley crew, including an underhive ganger, a sanctioned psyker, a squat, a member of the Tempestus Scions, and oddly enough, another Sister of Battle. Luckily, no one from the Bloody Rose who might have recognized her. They were tasked with assisting the local Inquisitor, Sophia Scarbeck, with preparing the planet for her departure to leave them as the wardens and ensure that the planet does not fall again towards heresy like the chaos cults she wiped out some 5 odd years ago. That was when the sky broke. In a split second, what would later become known as the Cicatrix Maledictum killed nearly all Psychers on the planet. And a few days later, while the party was out hunting down rogue witches, the Inquisitor herself was murdered and her manse razed to the ground in a blazing inferno. The party were the first ones on the scene of the aftermath, and under Aoife's guidance they decided to cover up the Inquisitor's murder, removing all identifying marks and destroying her body in the fire. Sworn to secrecy, they planned to bait out the culprits by keeping up a guise that the Inquisitor was still alive, just busy with other affairs while they would take her place in most dealings. The planet was quickly becoming unstable in the aftermath, and Aoife coerced the wealthy noble Baron Valest at gunpoint to donate his plentiful food stores to help feed the hive as resources began to become spread thin. They served as guardians aboard the relic locomotive named The Word, during which they half-stopped a heist from a group of new gangers, who made off with 3 chests that, according to the overseer Confessor Chattel, for some reason, entirely missing from the cargo manifest. It was around that time, as Aoife was getting more acclimated to the above-hive life, that she noticed the locals seemed to worship a figure known as Saint Francis, nearly as much as the Emperor himself, and knew she needed to discover more about this ancient figure who drove away the darkness and founded the prosperous hive city of Revachel. The party returned to the scene of the Inquisitor's murder and discovered in her mansion a hidden safe house yet undisturbed, and within it, behind several layers of security decoded by the squat Corin Biernan, was a chest covered in purity seals emanating an extremely troubling warp signature. It was to be left undisturbed for the time being until it could be understood more. To add fuel to the fire, the planetary governor was murdered, radiation poisoning delivered slowly over the course of years. His shifty advisor took the seat of power temporarily until a new governor could be agreed upon, and the Baron Valest invited the party to his annual Harvest Festival, which he saw as an opportunity for both of them to get rid of a troubling gubernatorial candidate. Of course, it was a trap. Each member of the party was isolated, and the Baron himself took Aoife to his private chambers in an attempt to correct his previous humiliation. But with guards surrounding them, Aoife was able to draw a las pistol she had hidden away in her party dress and shoot the Baron in the head before being promptly beaten unconscious. Waking up in shackles on a musty jail floor, she was greeted by the Baron, who appeared to be alive and well despite Aoife distinctly remembering seeing a clean hole through his brain. Soon the veil was lifted and the architects of much of the unrest were revealed as a Drukhari captain made himself known as the Baron's String Puller. The party staged a daring escape in which they discovered and rescued the somehow still living interrogator Udar, but in the process lost their Tempestus scion Tiber Krennic in an ill-fated attempt to snipe out one of the Drukhari officers. After they had regained their composure and contacted the close-by ecclesiarchy, a sweep of the festival premises revealed an ancient Eldari webway portal, which was promptly destroyed. They also received word from one of Udar's old friends who happened to land in orbit just as the sky split, the rogue trader Lorenzo Moretti von Albrecht Atreides. He was wealthy in resources and imperial fervor, and just the ally the group needed to get back on their feet. During the escape of the festival, the group found a map of Hive Revachel with several locations marked by Xeno tongue, notably the governor's palace, Baron Valest's estate, and the stronghold of the new gang that had appeared in the Underhive. This gang had to be dealt with not only to recover the missing chests, but now to discover their participation in this Drukhari conspiracy. During her scant moments of respite, Aoife's research into the legend of St. Francis was also beginning to bear fruit, learning of mysterious groups like the Knights of St. Francis and a repeated motif of 5 keys, from among other things the writings of a heretic and madman. Allies from the other Underhive gangs were gathered to stage an all-out war and draw out the new gang's forces while the party slipped in as a scalpel's edge to cut off the head of the beast. In doing so, they discovered another living interrogator, a Medicae officer who blamed herself for the Inquisitor's death. She gave the party the Inquisitor's augmetic eyes, which had been removed on the murder scene, and begged them to grant her a swift death, to which the psyker Morgana Voce granted the Emperor's mercy. The gang was subdued and the chests were found emptied, arriving moments too late as Drukhari infiltrators fled with whatever was in them. With the Underhive very temporarily and very shakily at peace, the party returned to the rogue trader's ship, where they found the interrogator murdered by a priest who was seeking travel to Bearspine. And the priest, as well as a secret chest kept by the rogue trader, were missing. By this point, the planetary government had seen another shift in power, and a noble who actively called for Aoife and the others' deaths was the new governor. A new plan was drawn up to overthrow the government and install the Pontifex, the clergy's planetary leader, as governor. At this point, Aoife had put the entire picture together. St. Francis had made a deal with a demon known as Rufficail, sealing him in a vault with 5 keys in exchange for the prosperity of a city built in his name. But she did not know who else she could entrust with this information, as it painted the well-loved saint as a heretic conspirator of the archenemy. After a grueling series of trials through the governor's palace, the party was confronted by the leaders of the Drukhari, who after the destruction of the Webway Gate found themselves trapped on a planet they despised. The party, battered and weary, struck a brief parley with the Xenos before Aoife could protest, and the elves were able to escape via a shoddy one-way gate they constructed with the help of the Psyker Morgana, in exchange for several persons of interest in the investigation and a hint as to the larger perpetrator to the events at hand. Aoife put the pieces together and ordered the rogue trader to send out an arrest warrant for Confessor Chatel, but as he moved to do so, Morgana opened up a hole in his torso with witchfire, an abrupt act of betrayal before vanishing into the warp, her demonic possession complete. It was at that moment that Aoife realized the final key laid in the Inquisitor's manor, which upon sprinting to was already missing. A column of light erupted from the Basilica of St. Francis, and the party, upon arriving, were beset with the surviving lineages of the Knights of St. Francis themselves, as well as demons summoned from the warp. A ritual was being conducted by Morgana and the Confessor to locate the whereabouts of Rufficail and set him free, but it was only partially successful, and a beacon was lit elsewhere in the hive, penetrating deep below the Underhive into the depths few dared to trod. The stakes were set, and the race was on to see who could reach the demon's resting place first. And as the party planned their descent, they were joined by Anya, the 9-year-old daughter and maybe clone of the murdered Inquisitor they had rescued from a corrupt Scala headmistress shortly beforehand. There were protests about taking a child into such a dangerous place, but Anya demonstrated a cool head and a surprising apt shot with a long las, suggesting that if the hive were destroyed, she'd die anyway. Lorenzo offered the position of arch-militant to the Underhiver heiress, who jumped at an opportunity to eventually leave the planet. At this point, Aoife performs the last rites of Solasta upon herself, a form of ritualistic and symbolic ego death, in which she sheds her station and her name, leaving behind only a spirit of the Emperor's holy wrath. This is where the official records of Aoife Del Cassian end, as, after that point, Aoife Del Cassian no longer officially existed. But there are those who know more than the official records would let on. As the party descended into the Underhive, the space and time around them began to shift and mutate under the warp's increasing influence. Aoife, seeking stability, went to what should have been the comforting site of the first spark, only to be confronted with some alternate version of herself from 80 or so years in the future. The party continued downward where even more temporal instability manifested, and the squat Corin Byrnin discovered a safe haven of mutants, apparently founded by himself, more than 100 years in the mutants' past, but still in the party's future. It was there that Corin revealed he had been a member of the Leagues of Votan the entire time, and ultimately made the heavy decision to sacrifice himself by merging with an irate machine spirit to prevent an imminent explosion of a plasma reactor. Aoife was shaken by the existence of this mutant haven and the realization that her comrade had been a Xenos infiltrator all along, but she had already pledged herself to the destruction of the demon Rufficail, and she was forced to set those lesser concerns aside. However, her trials were just beginning. Now below the Underhive and entering the Deep Hive, Aoife was confronted with a reconstruction of her memories of the Gene Sealer's assault. Not as events necessarily had happened, but as many of them could have. She worked with a projection of her sister superior Carria Vortel, the rest of the party, and a new-coming stranger, a howling banshee Eldari by the name of Onalone, who had been trapped in the inanimate memory for months. The memory looped back on itself, affecting Aoife and Onalone differently, and they were forced to work together to escape the time loop, which the Eldari revealed to be an illusion crafted by Slaanesh. Aoife was then confronted with an opportunity to head back into the past and undo the failures of that crusade into the Coronis expanse. But she realized that this would be giving into the whims of the Chaos Gods and rejected it, claiming that her penance was to live with her choices. The party began to put together that Rufficail, an agent of Slaanesh, was testing each of them in turn. But at the same time, except 5 years in the future, a psychic pull was felt across the Calixid sector by now Inquisitor Carria Vortel, who had survived her encounter with the Gene Stealer cults, but was secreted away into an Inquisitor's retinue on account of her newly unlocked psychic potential. Inquisitor Vortel entered the Underhive the same way Aoife did, 5 years apart, tracing the steps from the party to find whatever awaited her at the heart of things. The next trial was aimed at rogue traitor Lorenzo, who was also greeted by a version of himself from the future, a clone 13 generations deep with a vital flaw in the cloning process. The clone offered that having access to the baseline human would allow them to correct the flaw and ensure the line of succession remained unbroken, fulfilling Lorenzo's desire for legacy. Lorenzo rejected the clone's plan after learning the rogue traitor dynasty had adopted an annual culling ritual, which Lorenzo had enacted once out of desperation upon escaping the galaxy-wide warp storm of the Great Rift. He murdered his clone, and after arrest, the stronghold the clone's forces were previously occupying faded away as if it were never there. With nothing to do but move forward, the group was beset by a gigantic beast, some sort of demonic machine worm 10 meters in diameter and impervious to most of the party's attacks. That was when Sister Imperia Mortis stepped forward. Earlier, Imperia had come to Aoife in private, suggesting that she may be manifesting psychic powers, but Aoife brushed this off as, at worst, some form of Drukari drugging or experimentation while they were unconscious, since everyone knew that members of the Sororitas weren't psychers. In truth, Imperia did have psychic powers, and in a moment of desperation, had accepted a bargain from a small demon of Khorne, mistaking it to be an avatar of the Emperor's wrath. Facing down this creature, she embraced Khorne's power, and after being swallowed by the worm, disemboweled it from the inside. Aoife and the others had to stop her from cutting down a group of hostages that were being kept by the forces of chaos, and she appeared to regain her senses. Aoife, still in disbelief, credited it as a miracle. Next, they found a place of relative peace, a colony far below where any should be living. The Underhiver, Eris Defali, was confronted by the leader of this colony, her mother. Eris saw her mother die nearly a decade ago, but her mother claimed that Morgana's miracles had brought her back to the world of the living, and that life with the blessings of Morgana and Chattel was much better than anything the Imperium could offer them. And for what it was worth, that seemed to be true. Food was bountiful, water was clean, and there was a general peace in the colony. Moments before stumbling upon this area, though, Aoife had warned Eris, if the arch-enemy was not alluring, they would be easy to fight. Eris ultimately rejected this idyllic cove of the Hive, and the party moved forward after a tearful goodbye. Finally, the party reached the campus of Ascala, where they found themselves de-aged to all match Anya Scarbeck, with the exception of Onalone, who, although had been de-aged roughly 12 to 15 years, it simply did not make a difference. The now party of children had to navigate the drill abbots patrolling the halls and survive a dreaded pop quiz, which fellow Scala alum Aoife excelled and reveled in. A daring escape was staged with Anya's childhood friend, who she left at the last moment as the party crossed the walls, and were confronted with Inquisitor Scarbeck, who gave Anya the key to unlock the datapad she's had with her since she was an infant. At long last, the trials defeated, the party came upon the location of Ruffakel's prison, which was in the midst of being unsealed by Morgana, Chattel, and a host of demons, cultists, and the Knights of St. Francis. A drawn-out fight commenced in which Onalone fell to the throes of a self-inflicted battle fury, taking out as many of the enemy as possible before succumbing to their wounds. Imperia also appeared to fall, but then got back up and continued her charge. That's when Aoife finally put the pieces together. There was no Drukhari experimentation, only a lost soul fallen to the influence of chaos. The cult was defeated, and as Imperial lies sprawled on the ground, Aoife gently lifted off her helmet and saw the corrupting mark of Khorne marring her face. Taking Imperia's words that should the demon be defeated, Aoife should end her life, a quick blast from an Inferno pistol sealed Imperia's fate. Aoife, Eris, Anya, and Lorenzo were all who remained, faced with the 5 keys and the partially opened warp portal. As they debated how to split up the keys to ensure Ruffakel is never again set loose, Anya revealed that her data slate contained a solution. A living soul could take one of the keys into the portal and seal it behind them, ensuring that the keys could never again be brought together. Eyes widened among the group as Eris grabbed one of the keys and dove in before anyone could react, sealing herself in hell and saving the Hive as well as the planet. Aoife was left alone once again, the only surviving member of the original group that Inquisitor Scarbeck had recruited. As they began to leave the depths of the Hive, she heard a voice call out to her. Looking back, she saw Caria Vortel, a bit older and with some new-looking armor, flanked by a Kroot mercenary and a Skitarii assassin. The aftershocks of the temporal anomalies and the Emperor's guiding will allowed Caria to travel to this point for this purpose, to find Aoife. The two remarked that the last thing they expected to find down here was a sister thought long dead, and Caria reached out her hand, offering to show Aoife that the galaxy was a much bigger and stranger place than she knew. Lorenzo and Anya realized Aoife was no longer with them at some point, but there was little they could do. They reached the surface 5 years before Aoife and Caria would emerge, and Lorenzo began to take stock of the planet and begin the rebuilding process with his wealth of materials. For so long desiring control of Bearspire, taking stock of things, he realized his destiny lay elsewhere, and offered to take Anya along on his adventures. As for Aoife and Caria, well, you'll just have to ask a golden masked tech priest to find out what happened to them.